Welcome back to the Athlete's Edge podcast. On today's episode, we're going to discuss a topic that I listened to yesterday on a podcast with the two coaches and a coffee with Darren Burgess and Jason Weber. It's more centred around a coach who has worked in the AFL. He's worked a lot with professional soccer clubs over in Europe and won a lot of titles over there. I guess what got my attention was he doesn't really focus on regular speed exposure for his players. And I know with obviously what we do and how big we are on speed. And I guess the reasoning for him wasn't because he thinks it's unnecessary from a risk point of view. He just doesn't think it's necessary for a hamstring protection, which is the main reason why we obviously sprint for most sort of team sport athletes. So I guess what's your take on that?
It's an interesting point, and I think it would have people sort of opposing his view, which I guess I kind of would be, but at the same time, he would have people in his camp that would agree. There's probably a few reasons as to why, and I reckon I could justify his argument, even though I said I'd probably be more the other side. I think the first point is understanding timelines from, I guess, like an age and the pathway. And this would apply to footy, obviously, but as well as soccer and netball and basketball. Typically, we talk about that development pathway being from around sort of 12 up till probably 18 to 20, depending on the sport a little bit. So like obviously in America, they got college, so they're sort of 21, 22, but they still have a development, I guess, eye or focus. But that's changing with the new money over there in college sports. But then post that, it's very much around winning and job security and all these other factors. So they're not necessarily worried about improving. They're worried about protecting assets and keeping them on the park so that one, coach, staff, keep jobs, team hopefully win, which keeps everyone happy. Which means it's different. It's a different, I guess, approach to training where you're not trying to improve or raise the ceiling. You're just trying to sap the most of what you can given the constraints of the environment. That's always going to be different.
And what kind of factor does the schedule play? Obviously, he sort of worked in professional soccer where sometimes they're playing 2-3 games a week. So obviously you don't have that same preparation time compared to in Australia for the AFL, for example, where you have a week off.
Yep.
Between most games.
So so AFL obviously weekend-based scheduling, but even then you've got some 5, often 6 or 7, rarely 8 day breaks. So it's still not like a concrete, we play Saturday every week. It might be, Sunday, rarely into Friday, but Sunday into Saturday into Friday. So you might go 2 6-day breaks back to back, which obviously compromises your ability to recover, get main sessions in and prepare for the opposition, and even then the opposition matters. Like if you're on top of the ladder, you can probably afford to maybe even sacrifice a win or two potentially because you're trying to get through a bigger training block where you might stress players a little bit more, you might take a bit more risk on. But if you're sitting 6th and you're meant to be a flag fancy and you've got teams above you coming up in the next month, you might be deloading your training, playing it really safe because you're just trying to peak for the weekend. It's the constant pros, push and pull that coaches and staff have to make in the background because we just sort of think, train hard and play your best, but that's definitely not the case. There's an element of manage injury, manage actual risk, the freshness, and then that's generally speaking, then you've got every individual within that. So with the soccer example, so you'll have those clubs, like the big clubs will play a midweek like Champions League or whatever and then play their club games on the weekend, so 2 a week. Plus you could potentially have guys flying across the other side of the world when international seasons are on. So their schedules are crazy. So like their midweek game, like I said, it might be do or die, knockout. And then on the weekend, they've got to play for points where they don't have finals. So you either got to be first or you're last. Well, maybe not last because of relegation.
Is there ever a scenario where you wouldn't recommend an athlete sprinting during the week or vice versa where you would recommend them sprinting during the week, especially of a game week in season?
I think for me, I believe I would be trying to get sprint exposure in at least once a week in season, even in pro sports. But there would be 100% examples of players where you would sacrifice that. Like if Nick Dacos was worried about if he had a bit of a hamstring awareness, am I going to sprint him and risk him pulling a hamstring and missing a month, or am I going to say, well, let's just not train this week, and play on the weekend and help us win? I would be nursing him through and getting him to play on the weekend.
And is it more of like...
I know examples of guys that go through 2 months where they don't even get on the track.
And is it more of a midweek timing that you would sprint them, or is it closer to game? Where would you kind of structure it within the training week?
Middle to later in the week, not a day before. If you had to on a shorter week, maybe 2 days before, but it'd be a really short dose where you'd do obviously good warm-up, build-up, and you'd 1 or 2 touches of it at close to or right on top speed. But it's, obviously, middle of the week is furthest from the game and furthest from the next game. But if I had to go, closer to one, I'm probably going slightly closer to the next game just because of the recovery from the one before. And I've had more control over the week building up to that point. So if I knew, like a 6-day break, and I knew the training schedule was going to be more condensed, well then the coaches and the performance staff would be planning around gym, recovery, the football sessions to make sure they go, what are the big rocks that we have to get in? Obviously the footy training, if you believe in the high speed stuff, then that would be the priority, and then the rest of the week would be filled in around that.
And so how does the off-season kind of differ to the in-season? Obviously I know that it might be a bit more longer distance kind of sprinting in the off-season. It's maybe like a little bit more kind of repeat speed kind of stuff potentially, whereas in-season maybe a bit shorter, maybe less volume. What's the kind of major differences, especially when you program?
I don't know if I change it too much. I think it's more, you generally have fresher athletes, so I think you can see more improvement in the off-season. It's pretty hard to get improvements in-season. People get a bit flat about that, but I would say even just staying within 10%, 20% of your top speed is a win, because if you made the case around, well, if you weren't doing this, you might be 50% slower because of fatigue and just the coordination of sprinting, that you just haven't had any training for it. So sometimes staying the same is actually a massive win when everyone else is getting slower. What probably changes is the volume, and in that it's not that I'd want more of it and sacrifice quality. I can probably just fit in more of the drills and all the accessory stuff to help the speed development. So when I do a speed session, I think of a drill, I'm not thinking of it just from a technical sense of how will this help them sprint better from coordination and the technique. I'm thinking from a physical qualities perspective as well. So is bounding acceleration or sprinting? No, but are we talking a lot about our foot position, so some technical stuff, but at the same time we're working on our hip flexor strength, we're working on our ankles, calf stiffness when we hit the ground. So most drills are training multiple things, and there's lots of different options and ways to do it. I'm trying to pick things that tick at least 3 boxes that I think are important for me and the athletes we're working with, and then that's how I pick and exclude exercises, because there's some that I don't use that are probably good exercises, but I just think there's better ones that tick more boxes for the group we have, athletes we work with. So the big difference for me off season is I'm probably doing more of the dribbles, more of the skipping, more volume with wicket runs and that sort of stuff, and then just either some of that stuff gets left out or we just halve the reps essentially in season. The sprinting component probably doesn't change too much.
And so with that sort of being said, how do you plan on navigating the next sort of couple of months as we transition into our new facility and get that prepared? Obviously, we're sort of moving away from the speed sessions for a couple of months. So how do you plan on, I guess, microdosing or still getting some of those speed exposures in, even though we're not specifically doing a speed session?
Yeah, so the physical quality part, I think we can tick off pretty well still, because we'll have it in our gym-based stuff. So we'll lengthen the warm-up prep work in the gym so that we've got our velocity blocks and more of those. So it's still lots of plyometrics. So that'll increase in the gym sessions, because obviously we're getting a reduction from the speed. So I think that'll tick off a lot of that. Obviously their lifting stuff will be important. And I had a chat to a few athletes that if anything, more time in the gym will actually probably make them faster. I know we talk about how important sprinting is, but some of them are just weak, tight, whatever, relative to where they're at right now, meaning that the hardware improvements will lead to more speed improvements than the software. So learning how to use it, like you can't learn how to use something you don't have. I can't teach how to use a computer if you don't have a computer in front of you. You learn a lot quicker once you've got the computer. So so I think the gym stuff, more frequent exposure, better program there, because obviously we're tightening the rules a bit around that. Obviously then to complement some of the speed stuff, the plyometric stuff, like I said, and then we'll give everyone some really simple speed type stuff they can do as their warm-ups pre some of their training stuff. So then it'll be a bit more individual led, but to get that exposure and some of that speed work in, best time is warm up before you train. It consolidates load, you're fresh, because if you're about to go to training, you probably haven't done anything from at least that morning, maybe not since the day before. So yeah, you're fresher than if you were like doing a speed session the morning after training. So I think it'll still work, and in some ways it might work better for some. They might not want to go back to the speed, but that's where I'm excited when we get our new schedule, new facility, being able to incorporate speed and lifting. So then it's just a smaller dose of each in each session, but it's a more frequent exposure for everyone, which I think for development athletes that struggle to handle 40 minutes of really high quality work, 20 minutes of both, of actual training with explanations and rest and moving around and setup and stuff, is plenty.
And is there any other sort of reasons why you are such a big fan of microdosing and that sort of those little exposures across the week instead of those kind of dedicated speed sessions and dedicated gym sessions?
Yeah, probably the two big reasons are if they're bigger sessions and less often. Like we talk about consistency stuff, but I get 100% that it's hard to be on all the time, even just to make every session, just with how busy everyone can be. So if you're doing, 2 gym and 1 speed, well, if you miss your speed, you don't sprint for 2 weeks. Even 2 gym, you miss 1 gym session, that's 50% of your gym. Like missing 1 session doesn't sound like much, but when you say it is a 50% of your gym training, that's a bigger deal. If you're doing 1 and 1, well, again, you might miss a week where you don't sprint or gym for 2 weeks. That's what I always say, like if you're doing 5 sessions and you miss 1, you miss 20% of your week versus 50%. And arguably, the people that are on the 2 a week, the younger athletes, need it more. So they're missing a bigger percentage and they need it more. The other part is, as you know, like if you do a high quality session where you're focused and you're training at an intensity which strength, power, speed demands, which is why I think people don't like it and are drawn to conditioning and other stuff more, because you don't have to concentrate, you can just do sub-max efforts over and over all day, and like we said, it doesn't make you better. But it's hard to do that for an hour, like really hard, it's impossible. So I think almost shorter sessions, a bit more variety in there, like a bit more novelty around, like, we're doing speed now, righto, let's lock in, we're over to the gym, just to move that kind of focus and that feel, just helps people stay on track. And it just means we're just moving the type of stress, where the stress is going. We can manage, lower body, upper body, core, all the stuff we need to get in better. So I just think we'll have more locked in, still Geordie's phrase, locked in kids, athletes. And I think as a result, the quality of session will go up. And as a result, I think the results will go up. And they've been pretty good anyway. So that's why I'm excited.